Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is doing fine. First of all, I'd like to thank every single one of you for attending this webinar. A little bit about myself. My name is Anmol Maheshram. I'm the president of AAIWay's Young Entrepreneurs Group, and I'm here on behalf of AAIWay. So I'd like to brief you all about AAIWay. So AAIWay is a company which provides the youth and budding professionals a platform to excel and innovate using technology. Our aim is to build a community where people use the technology to bring that happiness amongst the society, amongst our community. So that is what AAIWay is about. We're currently focusing on the healthcare domain, and we've also started this initiative of AAIWay's Young Entrepreneurs Group, where we support and mentor those budding entrepreneurs and future leaders of our community. For the same, we have invited an expert entrepreneur, Myron Karasik, as a guest speaker today. He's got more than 48 years of experience, and he's been a C-suite management executive for a lot of MNCs across the US, and he's worked on n number of startup companies throughout his career. So he'll be sharing his experience on entrepreneurship during this tough economic crisis, during this transition, and how we could ride through this journey. And so, yeah, I just like to make Myron the presenter, and just feel free to ask any questions you have in the Q&A chat section. We'll be more than happy to answer them after the presentation's done, and we can just have a chit chat then. So I'll just turn off my webcam and I'll make Myron the presenter.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, Myron.
Hello. Okay. I just need to make sure I was unmuted. Okay. And you can see my screen. So I am going to turn this on and slideshow. Okay. Entrepreneurship. Let's talk about that. I have been an entrepreneur. I've had 3 of my own companies that I began and successfully transitioned to other places, as well as helped a number of entrepreneurs successfully grow their companies after running into a time of crisis in their own business. So what is entrepreneurship really? The term now is usually reserved for somebody who starts a new business, but the original French word meant an independent contractor. And an independent contractor is somebody who controls their own work, how they do their work. They have customers, they have suppliers, but they define how they do their work. And you should keep that independent attitude in mind, because you can have entrepreneurship even within an existing company. It could be anyone who develops new products, new organizations, or ways of doing business, or creating new markets, or making great changes in any of these that already exist. Very few people can actually start a new business from scratch, but anyone can be entrepreneurial within an organization that they find themselves in or in their community. Entrepreneurs, most of all, are leaders. They possess a vision of having a different future and how to get there. In other words, they have a strategy, and they can make it visible to people. They can conceptually structure their arguments in such a way that other people can grasp it and then be motivated to voluntarily contribute their skills in an allied fashion, so that make the thing a reality. And ultimately, what is success? It's delivering a product or service at an acceptable price and quality as compared to any alternative, while meeting all the financial obligations that are entailed. In other words, life to date, cash flow is king. Always keep your eye on that cash flow meter, as well as keep your eye on the service levels, the quality of your product, and your price as compared to any competition. Now, we live in a time of crisis. Well, we always are living in times of crises of one type or another. We have a disruption in the social and economic fabric of a community. That's what is a crisis. The community could be a company. It could be a company experiencing a cash flow crisis. It could be a company that suddenly finds the regulatory climate has changed and suddenly its way of doing business no longer works. I had that once with a relatively new startup. It was very new by insurance company standards. Most of its competitors were in business for over a century, but it was an environment where prices were set by the state. And all of a sudden, they decided to allow price competition. So the whole business model that the company that hired me as their chief technology officer and chief strategy officer was suddenly turned on its head. We had to go out and compete in a marketplace that they had never competed. And so we had to totally restructure the company in order to have them ride that out. We always have famines in one place or another, natural and man-made disasters, major technological changes, and most of all, as we've seen recently, disease. And this has happened over and over again. We have it now. We had the SARS crisis 20 years ago or so. There was the influenza crisis 100 years ago, so on and so forth, all the way back to the bubonic plague of the 14th century that killed anywhere from half to 2/3 the people of Europe and Asia. Change is always occurring, but today the speed and scope and duration of these events can mark turning points. COVID may be such a turning point, like the bubonic plague was. The bubonic plague unleashed urbanization, it unleashed a monetary economic system. So there were a whole bunch of things that changed because of that. This whole urbanization that we've living through even till today came out of that crisis, but perhaps that is about to change. What's changing now? We humans have thought ourselves as the alpha species, the top predator. And it turns out that we're at the mercy of other life forms, as well as climate change. And if you think about it, in the sea, the largest creatures actually live on the smallest. The blue whale, the whale shark, the giant manta, all feed on tiny microorganisms. Here we're finding we are being fed upon by microorganisms outside the sea. This is a change. Our trends of population growth and urbanization are or will be changing. We find that our concentrated populations are at greater risk. Our complex networks are fragile. They break down too easily. And our populations are aging, and they will decline in many societies over the next century. China's population is projected to be cut in half by the end of this century. Japan, half by 2050, etc. The United States still is moving along, but at a much slower clip, as is India. But other societies will be seeing greater changes. There will be a few that are growing, but many are declining. And there will be wealth declines. We're seeing that non-essential items are really no longer needed. You know, who needs to go to a retail shop to buy clothing? Who needs to actually take a tour anywhere? Okay, the tourist industry is on the rocks. Going out to restaurants, okay, or going to any other mass gatherings like sporting events, etc., doesn't really make sense in the current environment. And even after COVID is conquered or goes away, there will always be the risk that there's another one coming down the pike, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. People, are going to be gun shy, frankly. They're not going to be going out that readily in the future. So how do we ride this wave of change? What do we need now? What's broken? Well, for one thing, resilience. We need less network dependence, but we need to provide greater fault tolerance. Everything breaks eventually, but if you have single points of failure, you're always at very great risk. So we're finding that with supply chains. We're finding that now with our computer networks. Look at what happened to Microsoft 365 yesterday, or Google had a major failure a few days ago. You know, even the biggest players, you know, are finding their systems less than fully resilient. We need to minimize our energy needs and environmental impact. Part of that's the climate change issue, and part of that's just the fact that we need to make our systems less dependent on highly centralized power plants, et cetera. We need to take better advantage of solar power, better batteries, the ability to be more independent locally. We need to go to our customer's location or work from an employee's location. The nature of massing people together in large urban conglomerations and having to transport people from here to there in bulk doesn't really work anymore and shouldn't. We have the technologies now to do things differently. And most of all, we need to focus on essentials, sustenance, food, most of all, okay? Agriculture, okay, we need to get more resilient crops. We need to have better controlled environments, maybe artificially controlled environments to protect from floods and storms, et cetera, as well as the changing climate. We need to perhaps create more artificially generated food sources, et cetera. Hardier plants, water purification, water distillation, perhaps out of the atmosphere. Okay, get some of that humidity back to where it does some good. Shelter, particularly in places that are subject to stress. Safety, health most of all. And Amo mentioned that AAIWay is involved in health area. I was involved in health area quite a bit, a number of different companies. And their remote sensing, remote distribution, putting surgical environments and mobile units, bring it to the people, not gather people into large centralized hospitals where we just feed germs to each other. One of the unhealthiest places to be is a hospital or a large clinic. Okay, you're better off bringing the healthcare to the person or to the community. The tech is secondary. How we do it is not as important as what the end result is. The technology can make things more flexible, they can make things less expensive to deliver, but ultimately it's what is the service, what is the product that addresses people's immediate and basic needs. The questions to ask yourself in a crisis: what's broken? Okay. We had a crisis in the 70s that was due to the oil embargoes, and prices suddenly shot through the roof. And all of a sudden there was huge inflation, high rates of inflation. Suddenly money wasn't really worth keeping anymore because it basically was dissolving as you were holding it. In that environment, for instance, I was involved in one startup of my own as a co-founder, which was to improve the supply chain handling, to improve the ability of organizations to minimize the inventory of product that they needed to carry. And so we invented the first turnkey application solution for what was then a new technology of personal computers, and was able to sell companies and the large merchandising organizations that they sold to systems to address this problem, and we became very successful at it. The company is still in business under another name, but in solving this problem, we also created predictive analytics, what's now called big data, AI slash. The other thing we did was enterprise application integration, because we made all of the systems that were out there translate to a single common form, and then be able to translate the information back into local systems for downstream processing. The other company that I helped create, I created the product actually, designed by the founder, and that was a company to address cash management. Okay, cash was a problem. How do you navigate that properly? And created a database of solutions, and by creating this database and customized reporting for that, we were able to provide services to both the banks, the banking industry as a whole, as well as to large corporations and even smaller corporations who needed to manage their cash more efficiently. So again, and that company, again, is still in business. And so became top dog in its area. So what are the systematic social and economic impacts of whatever is broken? That's what you need to figure out. Where does it hurt? Okay, to the people who are in need. And then what are the costs that they're currently experiencing? It could be the loss of access to work. It could be the loss of access to food. It could be the loss of access to whatever. Okay, but or it costs a lot more, etc. What alternatives are there that you can come up with? And what does it take to implement any of these? And the choices you make, they provide the strategy that you're responding with. From there, you can develop a new business plan or a plan for an existing business to make changes. What are the resources, the capabilities needed to develop the alternatives? What do you need to deliver and maintain whatever is done? Because to develop is one thing, but to actually distribute the product, service it on an ongoing basis, meet the customer's needs on an ongoing basis, that's the important part. It's not just something flashy you can show on a screen and say, here, buy this, and be gone with it. No, it doesn't work that way. What final cost to reach the market? And at what price to the buyer? And is that price viable? In other words, does it exceed the final cost? Is it affordable enough to a large enough market? And finally, is the price that you're asking less than what they're currently suffering? Okay, people don't change behavior unless there's enough pain. And if you can provide a solution that reduces that pain or gets rid of it entirely, then you got something. Okay, my background very quickly, but it's not important.
Sustainability for a startup becomes a crucial factor in success. But during this global pandemic, it would really become challenging for a startup to sustain through this tough economic crisis. So, how would you suggest to overcome that?
When you say how to sustain, can you give me an example of what you're thinking of?
Just like, as a startup, during this crisis of COVID-19, it becomes tough as a company to sustain. So, and for especially for startups in general, one of the most important factors is sustainability as a company if you want to
Right,
grow ahead.
right.
So, because of COVID situations got in the way, how would you suggest a startup, to just overcome this tough phase so that they could sustain in the future?
Okay. Well, as I said, ultimately, to sustain any organization, cash flow is key. So the key issue, if you're already an existing startup and you're in the process, are you have a product you're already bringing to market, or are you developing that product?
So, say the product is developed
Okay.
and they want to go to the market now. Yeah.
Okay, so the real question is to find a distribution strategy that will work, and so the question will be is to find either a partner who has a channel you can already use that is working, or okay, so that would be one way, and that was probably the best way. Best way would be to leverage an existing channel that is working. In other words, where your target customer audience already is getting product or service. Okay, add to the channel. Okay, add something to the channel. Presumably, whoever has that channel takes a piece of the action, but you keep enough of it to make it worthwhile. To create a new channel yourself,
Right.
okay, clearly, again, depending on the nature of the product and the nature of your audience, if your audience is already accessible through online media, etc.,
Right.
then the trick is to raise awareness. So you're still going to need some form of referral source, or basically make a name for yourself somehow. The best, the best ways to get that is to either find an organization or a group of individuals who have the existing base of viewers, if you will, okay, whose opinions will matter, okay, as influencers that can reach your audience and say, they agree this is a great product, you ought to try it, okay, and you still may need to offer some discounts in order to get your first wave of users out there. Obviously, a user base, if you have a user base already, they can potentially be referral based. They may be able to provide referrals to you directly through their own friends and family and contacts, if you will. And you can, give them, so many rupees, if you will, per head for everybody who signs up that they recommend, etc. So, these are ways. I mean, the key thing basically is to get in front of somebody, and the only way to really do that is to reach out through people who already are out there. Because, I mean, yes, you can go and buy some advertising, you can do whatever optimization you can do on your software engine optimization search, on Google with AdWords, etc. But my experience with that is few and far between. Okay, you're better off, and I wouldn't at this point necessarily recommend Amazon, but something like that, whether it's Alibaba or other sites that have developed a good marketplace, shall we say, particularly depending on what it is you're offering. Okay.
Yeah.
So the key thing is you want something presumably that's different enough that people will say, oh, this looks something new and different, and it's not the 20th version of the same thing that's already out there.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's going to depend on the product, but yeah, that does make 100% sense. Thank you very much. The second question which has come across is, how can I display entrepreneurship while working in an organization or a corporate per se?
Okay, yeah, and that's what I was trying to point out, is that you can be an entrepreneur even in an organization. And the greatest opportunities for being an entrepreneur and sort of trying your wings, as well as learning some very good skills along the way that will serve you, is to work in the organization you are, is find what's broken. Because usually all organizations, they have, if you will, rules of engagement. This is what you do if this happens. This is what you do if that happens. Ta-da, ta-da, okay. And if they work reasonably well, people say, oh, don't change anything, don't do anything, just follow the rules. Okay, but things happen, okay, like the pandemic. Suddenly things are broken, things don't work. When things don't work, people are willing to change, okay? And as an entrepreneur, if you see that opportunity in an organization, latch onto it and make changes. I'll give you one from healthcare that I was in. Okay, I was working for a small, relatively small company. It had gone public, but its product was taken away because of bad lawsuits. Okay, it turned out people became paralyzed when they used the drug that was created by this company.
Right.
So the company was taken over by a venture capital specialist who was trying to package the company up for resale. And he bought a couple of small companies, and we were making and distributing robotic orthopedic equipment for post-surgical rehab. Anyway, it turned out that as things were changed, all of us, we were the cash flow engine for a larger, small hospital group. It had like 10 hospitals, but even though we were 5% of the revenue, we were 25% of their cash flow. Anyway, suddenly we started losing money. I had done some analysis and figured out what was broken, pointed it out to the CEO, and he asked, okay, what's your recommendation? How do you respond to that? And I gave him the
Yeah.
things that I would change, and he listened, said, well, I don't understand it, but that seems to make sense. You're now in charge of operations. And so he turned the operations over to me and to one other fellow to take on the external sales force. But we changed the whole company around. We became ISO certified. We became a clinically certified provider of nursing and rehab services. And in doing so, we also created the first two-way wireless messaging network nationwide in the United States. And that was one of the reasons we got the certification, because we could provide instantaneous coverage and service to patients in their home. That was something that hadn't been done before, and this was before the internet even became public. So it wasn't available. Wireless had just come out. In fact, the vendor actually started building out their network to meet our needs because we were expanding our geographic coverage ourselves. So, you know, and the boss of my boss, okay, the one who ran the healthcare, the hospital entity, when I made the presentation, gave me basically a $2 million blank check at the time, and which was a significant percentage of annual cash flow.
Yeah.
And you know, to build out the systems, to build out what we needed. We did turn things around. The senior company, or the parent company, followed our model, proceeded to buy up many more hospitals, and is now known as HCA. It's the largest privately owned healthcare provider in the world. We went from 500 million in revenue to 33+ billion in about 18 months.
Wow, that is
So,
really inspirational.
so
Yeah.
there are ways to do that. In my first job, for instance, I was working for Bell Telephone Laboratories. The Bell telephone system in the United States in the beginning of the 1970s was the largest company in the United States. It had a workforce of 1 million people. And I was hired as a new hire, professionally trained. They didn't even call it software engineering at the time because that term didn't even exist, but into a group that the parent company had formed 6 years before to develop the first telephone network management system on an automated basis. And they were doing that through using people who had worked in the system for 20, 30 years. They figured they had all the experience. They teach them how to program and they would create the system. Well, turned out the system didn't work. And that was a crisis. And the people who hired me had no idea what to do with me. And so I had to basically figure out what it was that needed to be done, which clearly was, well, get this thing to work. And in doing so, I helped create the standards for software quality assurance. They became the standards at the Bell system. Bell system actually ultimately cloned me thousands of times over, became the top software engineering company. I left actually relatively quickly because I received an offer to get an MBA, and I decided that experience is what made me go into business, because I solved a business problem. It wasn't a technology problem. The technology actually was simple. The business problem was much harder. And getting everybody to work in the same direction is what counts. And it was also the first exercise in leadership, because in the first installation of the corrected system, there was one part that I hadn't been allowed to touch, and that turned out to break down. And all of a sudden, everything stopped dead in the tracks. And I took a look at what was going on, said, oh, I can fix this. I wrote a little program, first time I ever wrote any code, that compiled and operated the first time without any correction, fixed the problem. It happened again, another point, fixed it again a few hours later, and then it was done. The senior people who were there from both sides, from both the customer as well as Bell system parent, said that behavior illustrated what they saw as natural leadership. Okay, didn't assign blame, didn't make an argument, just did what was needed to be done. Okay, it's leading from the front. You show leadership by taking charge of a situation and showing, if you do it this way, it works. And lo and behold, people will follow. And
Right.
that's how you earn. That's how you earn your stripes.
True. So I've got another question. So
Sure.
the question is, as a budding entrepreneur, like the person has a lot of interest in entrepreneurship, but really doesn't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
So anything you want to say on that?
How do you start as being an entrepreneur? I think the first, I think the first way
where to start.
Yeah, I'd say it's the mindset. Okay, the independence of thought. Okay, analyzing things, to see what's broken. So it's a matter of, finding opportunities to stretch yourself, to think things what Steve Jobs said about Apple. Think different. Okay, how would you do things different? So I'd say look at businesses that are out there. Look at things that are being done. Okay, understand your own strengths. Okay, what are your skills? What are your background? I mean, if you're coming out of a biology or healthcare kind of area, you may look at one thing. If you're an electrical engineer, you'll look at something else. If you're a mechanical engineer, you'll look at something else. Your expertise, you'll leverage your expertise somewhere along the line, okay? And if you're new, you presumably don't have a lot of work experience. Work experience helps. And anywhere you can have that experience is appropriate, even if it's in an internship, even if it's in a part-time job, learn something, okay, about how existing organizations function, and then say,
Right.
I can do this better. And if you can do it better, then do it, okay? Then you start thinking through, okay, well, what do I need? And what are the skills that I don't have? And then find some partners to work with who may bring those skills along, okay? So you may be very good at dreaming up a product, but you're not very good at selling it, okay? So team up with somebody who is good at selling it and marketing, and then it will make sense. Or somebody who's good at operations, who understands, yeah, I understand your design, but to build this at a decent price, okay, and to scale up the volume, as you will need to scale up, depending on how large a market you're trying to address, those are other skills. Those skills don't always follow. So that would be the way I would say. Always look for any opportunity in any organization, even if it's a voluntary organization, a student organization, or whatever. Okay, there are things that need to be done. Okay, understand how they're done now and how they might be done better. And as you learn and you get more confidence in yourself and understand how to act independently, not to just take somebody else's, word that this is the way you do it and don't think any further, then you have the makings of an entrepreneur. And as I said, it's not everybody can start a whole new business. That requires, you have to have enough capital. You have to have a broad enough skill set. You need to, so not everybody can do that. But within any organization, there are opportunities. It doesn't always work smooth all the time.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah, I'd say the next question is kind of building on top of it. So as you mentioned, marketing and sales. So next question is, I understand that marketing strategy depend on the sales of the niche market, the business that get reference, or maybe like they use social media marketing. Like, what would your approach be towards marketing for a startup in general?
Oh, well, as marketing in general is a very large area in and of itself. But the key element of marketing is basically understanding your customer and their needs and the severity of their pain, and then finding the channels and the messages that will reach them. Okay, so the message obviously has to address the pain, and the channel has to be one that is easy for them to do business with. It may not necessarily be the easiest for you to do business with, but for the customer. Okay, you have to put things from a customer's viewpoint. So I think that the whole concept of marketing is basically putting yourself in the shoes of your customer or your user base or whatever. If you understand that, you understand how they approach meeting their own needs, then you will be able to find a way to reach them, both in terms of the message and yeah, and the channel.
Yeah, that makes sense. Myron, the next question would be,
Yeah.
like what mistakes you made and like how you've learned through them, like throughout your whole entrepreneurial journey.
Okay. Well, let's take the company that I mentioned before. We have, remember I said we developed this software product for supply chain improvement. Well, it grew out, excuse me, it grew out of the cash flow crisis of the 1980s, the high rates of interest that cost. Well, one of the biggest problems we had was not getting enough capital to really grow the business the way we wanted to. And so we were successful, we grew successfully, but the original capitalization was very short term and very expensive. And the only way that we could basically meet those obligations was to sell out what I think was prematurely. And so that's one of the issues. Okay, when you do go to the market and you are looking to raise capital, make sure you have enough capital for the longer term. Okay, it may be that you get things in what are called tranches. You get them, you get X number of dollars or rupees today to get to a certain point. If you reach that point, you get so much more. Okay, that's legitimate. But our problem was we didn't do that, and the market situation was such that there was no quick way to raise the additional capital to retire the old preferred stock. And so as a result, we had to sell out prematurely. We made, a relatively nice return, for after 3 years, but it was not as much as it could have been. We could have been the company that bought the company that we were ultimately bought by, had we played our cards right. Okay, so that's item number one. That's one case. I'm trying to think of another case in terms of companies that didn't do quite so well. Actually, most of my companies did pretty well. I'd say the only other one, which was also a startup, it was a startup subsidiary, basically. I had a company that was in the what was called manufacturer's rep business. They acted as basically the sales force. They were sort of an outsourced sales force for high-end complex products by companies like Bendix and Honeywell, et cetera, Johnson & Johnson, not SC Johnson, not the other Johnson. Anyway, we developed for them as a Salesforce management system that they decided to market directly, and they had some success in that, but they had chosen a platform that was too limited. It was a time when there were too many variants, too many competing types of product in terms of hardware, so that choosing one particular hardware platform limited your options. And so, it wasn't on a PC, which was starting to be standardized. It was on one of the many small mini computer systems that existed at that time that no longer exist. Okay, none of these products lasted. Okay, they were a temporary manifestation. So that's another one. And then the only other startup I was involved with, mostly as a consultant, as an enterprise architect, was a startup wireless communications company. And they were going to be an infrastructure provider to a certain class of carrier. And so we developed this whole brand product, but we were entirely beholden to a single strategic partner. And that strategic partner, which was an electric power company, they had invested in one of these carriers that turned out to have won the bulk of the spectrum licenses across the country. And then they decided, well, they didn't need this anymore. They didn't need to have a separate infrastructure company. And so they suddenly basically turned off the tap. So again, sort of a single point of failure on the capital side. And there was no other option for the people to go and find alternative funding. As it turned out, the other company for which they closed this one out for went bankrupt big time, and none of the licenses were ever used. So it was a case of where they overpaid. They bid and bid and overpaid for everything. So watch out for that. Don't overpay. Again, cash flow,
Right.
cash flow. Keep things in sync.
Right. Yeah. I think those were the questions, and like there are quite a bit, but I think like time's been a constraint. So what I'll do is I'll be filling up feedback form, and I have a section where if people have any question, just feel free to type in, and then we can get them answered by Myron and then get back to you.
Yep.
But yeah, I need to thank especially Myron for agreeing to present, and everyone for attending the webinar. It's been great. Like we've had a lot of insightful conversations with Myron, and hope that helps everyone. Bringing on to the next points, I have a couple of things to say. We'll be having another webinar in the coming month. So, if you've enjoyed this, we'd want you to attend that one as well. We'd be having a lot of insightful conversation there as well. And in the coming months, we are also planning a pitch-in competition where all those budding startups will have a chance to, gain funding opportunities and, really scale up. As Myron said, cash flow is the key, and that is what we want to provide to all those budding startups. And finally, I'd like to say we'd really, really appreciate your feedback as to how we can improve, or what have we done good, or what else can we do, and your suggestions as to how we can implement, or what topics would you want for the coming sessions. But again, thank you very much for attending today, and hope you have a great day. Take care and see you in the coming sessions. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Bye now.
And thank you very much. Bye.